kind of star. His movie career would last for just 16 months. He would leave us with only 3 motion pictures, yet his presence would be so dynamic, his work so extraordinary, it would earn him his place among Hollywood's immortals.
You're tearing me apart!
What?
You say one thing, he said another, and everybody changes back again!
I'm cute, too.
Is that meaning me? A chicken!
Yes. You shouldn't call me that. James Dean was a complex person on screen and off. He was an introvert. He was an exhibitionist. A loner. A charmer. He played the congas. He raced cars. He was polite. He was rude. But whatever he was authentic. And millions of young people could identify with him. His friends remember the many facets of his personality.
He had a provocative curiosity. He was a stir-upper. He wanted eventually to get underneath things. He wanted to see the black and dark side of life. It was the interesting underbelly of everything.
He was ahead of his time. I mean, just like the rebel. He fits in with some of these kids today, really. I think he was true rebel.
I liken it to a kind of star or a comet that fell through the sky, and everybody still talks about it. They say, remember that night when you saw that shooting star? And that was it. I mean, he had that enormous appeal and magic.
His would be the most spectacular but briefest career that Hollywood has ever known. Less than 2 weeks after completing his 3rd motion picture, James Dean was dead. The victim of an automobile accident. He was 24 years old. Nothing since the death of Rudolph Valentino would equal the mass hysteria that followed. Despite the evidence of the photos and eyewitness accounts, his fans refused to believe that he was dead. They claimed that the funeral was a charade and that his grave was empty. When threats were made to dig up the coffin, local police guarded the cemetery for weeks. Rumors surfaced that Dean was alive, but so badly disfigured that he was hidden away at a private sanitarium. People were just beginning to discover this new phenomenon called James Dean. At the same time, they were being told that he was dead. It was something they didn't want to hear. His house in the San Fernando Valley and his apartment in New York were ransacked for souvenirs. A bed sheet that he had slept on, a glass that he had touched, anything that was part of him. When the grotesque wreckage of his Porsche was exhibited in public, thousands of Dean worshippers came to see and touch it. But it wasn't enough. Slowly they began to consume the car itself. Pieces of the soft aluminum were broken off and taken. Shards of glass were made into rings. Anything that could be turned into a sacred memento was. James Dean, the new promising actor, had now become James Dean, the new American idol. No one ever captured the feelings of being young better than he did. The insecurities, the confusion, the loneliness. He expressed the anguish of growing up as no one had done before.
If I had one day when I didn't have to be all confused and I didn't have to feel that I was ashamed of everything, if I felt that I belonged someplace, you know?
James Dean was gone, but he wasn't forgotten. For 3 years following his death, letters addressed to Jimmy outnumbered the fan mail of any living Hollywood star. James Byron Dean is born in Marion, Indiana, during one of the darkest years of the Depression. Millions of workers are unemployed. Thousands have lost their homes and are relegated to bread lines and soup kitchens. The Deans are more fortunate. Jimmy's father, Winton, is a dental technician employed by the government. His safe job and steady paycheck will help insulate Jimmy from the harsh realities of the Depression. During this bleak time, Jimmy's mother, Mildred, introduces her son to the arts. She reads him her favorite poems, and as soon as he is old enough, she sends him for dancing lessons. Theirs is a very special relationship. As an only child, Jimmy receives a great deal of his mother's love and attention. When Jimmy is 5 years old, the government transfers his father to Los Angeles, California. In 1939, 3 years after the Deans moved to California, Jimmy's mother becomes ill with cancer. Confused and frightened by his mother's deteriorating condition, 9-year-old Jimmy watches helplessly as her beauty and energy fade. July 14th, 1940, 29-year-old Mildred Dean dies. Jimmy is devastated. Without his mother to care for him, it's decided that Jimmy should return to Indiana. His father will remain in California, and their relationship will never again be close. In Indiana, Winton's sister Hortense and her husband Marcus will now be the ones to raise Jimmy. Jimmy is sent back to Indiana with his grandmother on the same train that carries his mother's body. Every time they stop, Jimmy gets off and runs to the baggage car to make sure his mother's casket is still aboard. Her death leaves Jimmy embittered and abandoned. Later he will say, "My mother died on me when I was 9 years old. What does she expect me to do? Do it all alone?" When Jimmy arrives at his aunt and uncle's farm, the Winslows do whatever they can to help him get over his loss. As the months pass, Jimmy slowly accepts his new life on the farm. During this time, Aunt Hortense, a member of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, encourages Jimmy to perform at the Back Creek Church by giving readings on the evils of alcohol. At school, Jimmy asked Adeline Knoll, his drama teacher, to help him with his readings.
He was an unusual child. He was a precocious child. I knew that. He liked to perform. His grandmother told me that, Emma Dean, said from the time he was just big enough to stand on a table or on a chair, he'd perform, give his readings.
In school, Jimmy also shows that he's talented in artwork and in acting. In his junior year, after a successful performance of Our Hearts Were Young and Gay, Adeline's drama students present her with an orchid. The next day, Jimmy asks for it back.
Jim came over and he pointed to it and said, "I want that." And I said, "Why, Jim?" He said, "Well, you'll find out at the end of the day." The next day he came in with the painting. So he said, "Now you'll have it forever." So this is my forever piece. And instead of signing Jim Dean, he puts "Her Pride," which is pretty sweet of him.
While Jimmy is a student at UCLA, he lands his first professional acting job and makes his film debut. Jimmy is paid $30.
Go get Pepsi for the Pepsi bounce.
Now go get Pepsi for the Pepsi bounce. More bounce to the ounce, more bounce to the ounce. Go get Pepsi for the Pepsi bounce.
Then why take less when Pepsi's best? More bounce to the ounce with Pepsi.
In Jimmy's next few screen appearances, he will have little visibility.
Pepsi gives more fun, more bounce to the ounce.
With only bit parts and little recognition, Jimmy becomes frustrated in Hollywood and decides to try his luck in New York. September 1951. New York in the early 50s is the place to be. The Broadway theaters are thriving, and a new electronic marvel called television is offering opportunity to the legions of unknown actors, including James Dean.
Are you ready?
Jimmy's first job in television is on a show called Beat the Clock. The premise of this show is to perform bizarre and difficult stunts within a certain time frame in order to win prizes.
That's it. All right, stop the clock. Put 'em out. Good clock and go.
The rules of the show stipulate that all of the stunts, no matter how hard, must be physically possible. Backstage, testing these stunts to make sure they can be done is none other than James Dean. October 1952, Jimmy's luck changes. He lands his first leading role on Broadway in a play called See the Jaguar. He plays the part of a vulnerable teenage boy who has been locked up all his life by his demented mother. The critics single out Jimmy for giving an excellent performance, but find the play silly and contrived. It closes within a week. For the next year, Jimmy appears in more than a dozen TV dramas. Then, in 1954, his big break comes when he's cast in a play called The Immoralist with Louis Jourdan and Geraldine Page. Jimmy gets to play the part of a corrupt Arab houseboy. During rehearsals, Jimmy and the director do not get along. The director wants Jimmy to respect his authority. Instead, Jimmy experiments with his role, changing it each time with a new interpretation. After weeks of backstage battles, Jimmy has had enough. The Immoralist opens on Broadway to good reviews, and Jimmy gives his director 2 weeks' notice. As Jimmy begins to look for new work, director Elia Kazan has begun looking for a new actor. Kazan is about to cast the lead role of Cal Trask in his new motion picture, East of Eden, and considers Jimmy for the part. Before making his final decision, Kazan holds a screen test in New York for the 2 finalists, James Dean and another unknown, Paul Newman. The part of Cal Trask, the Choice Hollywood Role of the Year, goes to James Dean. Before leaving for California, Jimmy meets his co-star, Julie Harris.
I remember meeting him for this little screen test. It was just really to see us together, how we looked together. And at one point, I remember putting my hand like this, and Jimmy said, "Why do you do that? Do you think you look too old?" And I thought, "You son of a bitch." I didn't say that. I said that to myself. I said, "Well," I said, "I am older than you." And from then on, it sort of got into the back of my head that I knew that was a sort of device to keep you off guard, so that everything was alive. He just reminded me from the very beginning of Tom Sawyer, a guy who would always get you to paint the fence and get you into the terrible scrapes. But it was all like, well, what's life for? It's not to just go plodding in the same places every day, but it's an adventure.
Jimmy's first major movie is based on the last third of John Steinbeck's novel, East of Eden. It is the story of a son trying to please his puritanical father, who constantly disapproves of him. The father is played by Raymond Massey, and the son by James Dean. Their uneasy union in the story is heightened by Dean and Massey's real-life relationship. Jimmy's use of profanity is not appreciated by the Oxford-educated Massey, who is both religious and conservative.
Sad to think that he had to die so young.
My friend had died, and I hadn't lost anyone. And by that time, he had come to mean a great deal to me, because he was the substance of the proof that it could happen, and that it wasn't a waste of time, and that it all meant something. And all of a sudden, whatever meant something had come to an end. There was no more Jimmy.
The actor always asks himself, who am I? And I don't think Jimmy had quite finished answering that question. I don't think he was a finished person. He had a lot of things to do.
I know that he wanted to become a director. And he always said that his greatest fear was writing, because he didn't know if he really had anything that was worthwhile saying, because he respected, the great writers, and he didn't want to put his characters in a position where finally when they spoke, he found out that he really had nothing to say. So he had a lot of insecurity about that. But I think he would have turned into a great director and writer and filmmaker. I think that's where he was going.
On the night James Dean died, artist Kenneth Kendall began working on the statue that Jimmy had wanted. 6 months later in Fairmount, Indiana, the finished bronze bust was mounted on a pedestal in the cemetery where Jimmy was buried. As James Dean was being honored in death, he was also being slurred. Shortly after its dedication, the sculpture was sawed off its foundation and has never been recovered. Immediately after its disappearance, rumors began to surface that it had been taken by war veterans who were angered not only because the statue honored a movie star instead of a soldier, but also because they claimed that Jimmy had avoided military service by registering as a homosexual.
I know some of the veterans were, kind of up in arms about it, but now I'm a veteran myself, and I didn't hear anything about it, and it really didn't bother me. I know definitely he was not a homosexual. The last time Jim was home, we went out, and I won't reveal it any farther, but I do know definitely that he was not.
I really don't pay attention to stories like that. Don't they say that about everybody that gets famous, it seems like? I mean, they're always after looking for some kind of dirt.
Along with the disappearance of James Dean's bust, many of his personal belongings are also gone. The tape recordings he made of his private thoughts and feelings, and the 16mm movies that he took on the set of Giant are still among the missing. However, the most bizarre disappearance was that of James Dean's car itself. Shortly after being displayed in a number of car shows, it too vanished and has never been found. No one knows what would have become of Jimmy had he lived. One can only guess. What we do know is that James Dean was one of our most gifted actors. Having made only 3 motion pictures, he was nominated for an Academy Award as Best Actor in 2 of them, East of Eden and Giant.
Well, I'm not going to be around here anymore. Ever. Not you or me.
I love somebody. All the time I've been looking for someone to love me, and now I love somebody. And it's so easy. Why is it easy now?
It's for me too.
I love you, Jim. I really mean it.
Immortalized in music, books, and in films. But most of all, he is immortalized in our hearts. Forever, James Dean.